Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories of the hour. The United Kingdom, Canada, Portugal and Australia have formally recognised the state of Palestine as they continue to press for a two-state solution. Hamas hailed the decision as a step towards independence. Amid the surge in diplomatic recognition for Palestine, the United States has dismissed the announcement as performative, insisting priorities should remain on hostage release and Israel's security. While French President Emmanuel Macron has backed statehood recognition but made it clear that a French embassy in Palestine would only open the condition that all the hostages are freed. Jimmy Kimmel will return to his late-night show on Tuesday, days after a controversial suspension over jokes about Charlie Kirk's death. Disney says it has resolved the issue, but some US TV networks still refuse to air the program. The United States, Japan and South Korea have voiced concern over destabilizing activities around Taiwan and oppose what they call unlawful maritime claims in the South China Sea. Their foreign ministers met in New York and also reaffirmed commitment to ending North Korea's nuclear program. Former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has been charged with crimes against humanity by the International Criminal Court. He is accused of being an indirect perpetrator in murders linked to his war on drugs, which killed thousands without trial. China has ordered schools and businesses shut in 10 cities as Super Typhoon Ratsaga approaches the south. Authorities warn residents to stay indoors, with Shenzhen and other major urban centres on high alert. The US FDA has approved leucovorin, a form of folic acid for the treatment of autism. President Trump also claimed an unproven link between autism and the painkiller Tylenol, a statement doctors warn lacks scientific basis. Okay, we start this hour in New York, where French President Emmanuel Macron has announced at a United Nations summit in New York that France formally recognises the state of Palestine. Addressing the high-level conference co-organised with Saudi Arabia, Macron called for Israel and Palestine to live side by side in peace and security. The announcement drew lengthy applause from the audience. Let's take a listen in.
Depuis juillet dernier, l'accélération des événements est terrible. Et au point où nous en sommes, il est à craindre que les accords d'Abraham ou de Camp David soient remis en cause par l'action d'Israël et que la paix devienne impossible pour longtemps au Moyen-Orient. Il pèse donc sur nous une responsabilité historique. Nous devons tout faire pour préserver la possibilité même d'une solution à deux États, Israël et la Palestine, vivant côte à côte, en paix et en sécurité. Et la reconnaissance des droits légitimes du peuple palestinien n'enlève rien aux droits du peuple israélien, que la France a soutenu dès le premier jour, et au respect desquels elle n'est pas moins attachée, précisément car nous sommes convaincus que cette reconnaissance est la solution qui seule permettra la paix pour Israël. J'entends avec beaucoup de respect le peuple israélien, sa tristesse et sa fatigue. Et je veux croire que les autorités israéliennes l'entendront également et sauront s'engager à leur tour. Je sais que le peuple israélien et ses dirigeants peuvent en avoir la force.
Macron stressed that France's recognition does not diminish Israel's rights, vowing to continue what he called an existential fight against anti-Semitism. He also outlined a framework for a renewed Palestinian Authority and said that France would open an embassy subject to reforms, a ceasefire and the release of remaining hostages held in Gaza. Let's take a listen to the French president.
Et la reconnaissance des droits légitimes du peuple palestinien n'enlève rien aux droits du peuple israélien, que la France a soutenu dès le premier jour et au respect desquels elle n'est pas moins attachée, précisément car nous sommes convaincus que cette reconnaissance est la solution qui seule permettra la paix pour Israël. Cette reconnaissance de l'État de Palestine est une défaite pour le Hamas, comme pour tous ceux qui attisent la haine antisémite, nourrissent des obsessions antisionistes et veulent la destruction de l'État d'Israël.
Now, with this move, France joins Britain, Canada, Australia, Portugal, and other Western allies who extended recognition in recent days, bringing the total number of countries recognizing Palestine to more than 150. In Paris, activists and elected representatives unfurled a Palestinian flag from a city hall window in a symbolic show of solidarity. Left-wing politicians, including Paris Deputy Mayor David Bolliard, defied government warnings and said it was important to reaffirm their support for the Palestinian people. Okay, we have further news updates from this story. Okay, we're now joined by Charles Thompson. He is an Australian journalist and he joins us live from Sydney. Charles, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. It's a pleasure to have you. First of all, of course, France follows the United Kingdom, Canada, Portugal and others. This Western push to recognise the state of Palestine. France, of course, was the first of the G7 to announce that it was going to do so at this meeting in New York. But what does it truly mean in practice?
Well, we can say it's symbolic, but in actual fact, if we look a little bit more carefully, what they've managed to do is put off the Americans and put off the Israelis. And without the Americans and without the Israelis, nothing can change. I mean, I don't think you can get in and get out without the Israelis' permission. And then you've also got on the other side, you've got the Egyptians on their border with Gaza. So it's a token gesture, but I can see for Australia it's complicated things because it looks like now the Australian Prime Minister can't get a meeting with the President of the United States. So, I mean, how helpful is that for Australia? I mean, token-wise, fine. It's a lovely idea. It's a lovely thought. We all want the Palestinian people to have their own state and live peacefully. But it's such a complicated issue, and I don't see how this is going to help.
And Charles, of course, we have the likes of Mahmud Abbas, who's going to be speaking. He already has yesterday, but he will be speaking in his own session coming up on Tuesday and then following by Benjamin Netanyahu in person on Thursday. How do you think both of those two leaders are going to be reacting to this? Of course, Benjamin Netanyahu advocates very much against this.
What's happened is the international community, except for the United States, has put Israel into a corner. And if you put Israel into a corner, they'll just move more settlers. Sorry.
That's all right, Charles. But yes, of course. And as you said, Israel's government, of course, is made up of many parties. Benjamin Netanyahu's controversial coalition, including the likes of Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, who are controversial figures. Bezalel Smotrich in particular, the finance minister, who has approved the E1 settlements in the West Bank. Could you tell us a bit about that and tell us a bit more about his statements when it comes to Palestinian statehood and his openness against it?
Was that directed at me or Mr. Sachadev?
It was at you, Charles.
Oh, okay. Look, it's extremely complicated. There are so many factors here. I mean, to me, it's all just window dressing. If truly Australia, Great Britain, France, Portugal were serious about this, they'd sit down with the Americans, come up with something, and then the Americans would go to the Israelis. Until that's done, nothing's changing on the ground. If anything, it might make it worse, because we can't forget the hostages. And put any country in a situation where their countrymen are being held as hostages, it's just going to make the Israelis even more upset. And what we need is the cooperation of Israel to finish and resolve this matter so the Palestinians can start living their lives.
Yes, Charles, we do have some more information from a related development where dozens of world leaders gathered at the United Nations in a landmark diplomatic shift expressing support for the recognition of a Palestinian state. The high-level summit came nearly 2 years into the war in Gaza, and despite strong opposition from Israel and the United States. Listen in to what some world leaders had to say on the issue.
Norway will continue to support the Palestinian government, including through emergency funds we are mobilizing with other donors. And we continue to call on Israel to release the tax revenues owed to Palestine. These revenues are desperately needed to fund schools, hospitals, and the police. So, friends, this is a time to stand up and be counted. As defenders of human dignity and human rights, as defenders of a world with firm laws and rules, as defenders of peaceful resolutions. For 80 years, the UN has been a family of nations. The state of Palestine belongs to this family.
I am also aware of the opinion that recognizing the state of Palestine somehow amounts to a victory for Hamas. A two-state solution, however, is the worst possible outcome for Hamas. It is not what they want to see. They want to see Israel wiped off the map. Malta and our allies want to see Hamas wiped out. We must never forget that Hamas openly and violently opposed all the previous efforts at peace.
We Europeans will set up a dedicated instrument for Gaza's reconstruction in coordination with other donors' efforts. Gaza must be rebuilt, the Palestinian economy must be relaunched, and I invite all of you to join in the effort to make this happen.
Our position is clear. Italy is against the occupation of Gaza Strip and against any idea of displacement of its population. Italy condemns also the recent attack against Doha, but we encourage Doha to continue in the crucial effort to mediate, together with Egypt and the United States, to reach a ceasefire.
الدول التي تعترف بفلسطين اليوم تتحمل جميعا مسؤولية حماية الفلسطينيين من القتل الممنهج وحماية المشروع الفلسطيني من إجراءات عقابية موتورة تهدد فرصه المستقبلية وتعيده للوراء.
Okay, we are once again joined by Charles Thompson. Charles, apologies for the technical issues we seem to be facing. Of course, Europeans here, we're hearing vocal support for the two-state solution here. However, there are still some members, including the likes of Germany, who still maintain the idea that it is not the right time to recognize the state of Palestine. What are the arguments there, despite the fact that 150 nations on the planet do right now?
Okay, so I won't repeat myself too much, but without the Israelis, nothing can be achieved. But I think what would be fascinating is what are the Jordanians and what are the Egyptians saying? And what are the Arabs themselves saying? I mean, it's okay for the Europeans, it's okay for the Australians and everybody else to jump up and down and start talking. But at the end of the day, even with a two-state resolution, and if it was in the future to be successful, it would also need the good wishes and the support of both Jordan and Egypt.
Yes, Charles, we do have further updates. Do stay with us. Meanwhile, as the UNGA summit progresses, the Palestinian President Mahmud Abbas has called for Hamas to surrender its weapons to his forces while condemning the group's deadly attack on Israel in an address to a UN summit on a two-state solution. Let's listen in.
لن يكون لحماس دور في الحكم وعليها وغيرها من الفصائل تسليم السلاح للسلطة الفلسطينية لأننا نريد دولة واحدة غير مسلحة وقانونا واحدا وقوات أمن شرعية واحدة ونؤكد إدانتنا لجرائم الاحتلال كما ندين قتل وأسر المدنيين بما في ذلك ما قامت به حماس في 7 أكتوبر 2023.
Now, of course, the United Nations General Assembly kicked off yesterday with the United Nations chief calling to confront global crisis with unity and resolve, and a warning that the founding principles of the institution are under severe strain. During the opening session of the General Assembly, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has warned that UN principles are under assault as never before. Let's listen.
There is a persistent myth that peace is naive, that justice is sentimental, that the only real politics is the politics of power and self-interest. But those early staff were not idealists untouched by reality. They had seen war and they knew. Peace is the most courageous, the most practical, the most necessary pursuit of all. And in building the United Nations, they created something extraordinary, a place where all nations, large and small, could come together to solve problems that no country can solve alone. And yet, at this moment, the principles of the United Nations are under assault as never before. As we meet, civilians are targeted and international law trampled in Gaza, the Ukraine, Sudan, and beyond.
Opening the General Assembly session, the UN General Assembly President Annalena Baerbock has said that the 80th anniversary of the United Nations is not about celebrating, but about finding the hope and spirit from 80 years ago. Let's hear her statements.
Is this a world envisioned in our charter? Do we really need to relearn the hard lessons? Today is not about celebrating. It's about remembering those hard lessons and drawing on the courage to once again agree, to find hope instead of resignation, to find the spirit from 80 years ago once again.
This comes as world leaders gather in New York for the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly. The 193-member body is set to host 6 days of speeches by nearly 150 heads of state or government, along with dozens more ministers. Okay, we're once again joined by Charles Thompson. Charles, can you tell us the importance and the power of the United Nations in present day? Of course, the United Nations Secretary General there just voiced concerns about the current state of the world. Critics say that the United Nations in the current climate doesn't have the power that it used to. Do you think those critics are correct?
Oh, absolutely. And of course, the interesting thing is we're talking about statements by Australia, UK, and a few other countries about the Palestinian state, when something far more transformative is happening in the Arab world, and that is the defense agreement between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. That has huge implications for the whole region there, and it's just not even been spoken about. I mean, the whole idea of renting out your nuclear weapons, it's extraordinary. But no, we're stuck with the two-state Palestinian solution, and we're not even talking to the party that has to be to the party, which is the Israelis. So interesting times ahead, and I definitely feel with every passing day, the United Nations becomes less and less representative and less in touch with, or less able to do anything in the world.
What do you think is going to be the most significant day coming out of this? Of course, we have huge moments that have come out of history in this meeting. Benjamin Netanyahu is set to address on Thursday. Donald Trump, within the next 24 hours, will be covering that very soon. Your thoughts on what the people are gearing up to see at this General Assembly?
Well, if President Trump's giving a speech, no doubt he's going to create his usual chaos and surprises. So if Trump's involved, everything else will become secondary. He will take the oxygen from the room. So it'll be Netanyahu will say something and it will be forgotten or will be covered for a few minutes. But Trump is the master of distraction. So my bet is on whatever the Trump speech in the United Nations. That will be very interesting.
Yes, Charles, do stay with us once again. We have further coming out of New York, where leaders at the UN Security Council, including Washington's new envoy to the United Nations, condemned Russia during an emergency meeting over an incursion by Russian fighter jets into NATO member Estonia's airspace. Let's take a listen in to what the leaders had to say.
This event, following on the heels of the Russian drone incursion into Polish airspace, creates the impression that Russia either wants to escalate and pull more countries into this conflict with Ukraine, or doesn't have full control of those who operate its fighter planes and drones. So either scenario is very disconcerting, given that Russia is obviously a nuclear power with global reach. And so I once again urge Russia as a permanent member of this council to uphold international peace and security.
Ladies and gentlemen, what brings us here today is alarming. On 19 September 2025, 3 armed Russian MiG-31 fighter jets deliberately entered Estonian airspace in violation of our territorial integrity. They remained in our skies for 12 minutes, penetrating up to 10 kilometers deep and covering nearly 100 kilometers inside our sovereign territory. These are the hard facts based on solid evidence, whatever Russia is claiming.
А между тем, факты свидетельствуют о том, что 19 сентября 3 российских истребителя МиГ-31 осуществили плановый перелет из Карелии на аэродром, расположенный в Калининградской области, который выполнялся строго в соответствии с международными правилами использования воздушного пространства. Российские воздушные суда не отклонялись от согласованного маршрута и не пересекали воздушное пространство Эстонии. Их траектория проходила над нейтральными водами Балтийского моря, на удалении более 3 километров от острова Вайндла. Это подтверждается данными средств объективного контроля. Если бы в Эстонии этого хотели, то могли бы сами в этом убедиться. Но такой цели у Таллина нет. Задача состоит в другом. вопреки фактам и здравому смыслу, нагнетать истерию и обвинять Россию в провокациях. И вот уже представители НАТО сразу же поспешили назвать происходящее безрассудным поведением. А глава европейской дипломатии и по совместительству эстонка призвала к твердой позиции в поддержку стран Балтии.
Russia hopes that it might force us to draw our focus away from supporting Ukraine and focus solely on our own security. Well, let me be very clear. European security starts with Ukraine. And any provocation against EU member states will only strengthen our resolve to support Ukraine. I say this openly to Russian representatives in this room. Your government's actions are reckless, dangerous, and go against the very principles of the United Nations.
In the meanwhile, the NATO allies accused Russia at the United Nations of violating the alliance's airspace in Estonia and Poland. The British Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper, said that, quote, "Your reckless actions risk direct armed confrontation between NATO and Russia. Our alliance is defensive, but be under no illusion, we stand ready to defend NATO's skies and NATO's territory." Washington's new envoy to the United Nations vowed to defend every inch of NATO territory, end quote, as he addressed an emergency meeting over an incursion by Russian fighter jets into Estonia's airspace. Okay, we're now joined by Ambassador Sachdev. He joins us live from New Delhi. Ambassador Sachdev, thank you very much for joining us here on the program, and it's always a pleasure to have you. Of course, this is the third time that Russian aerial powers have entered NATO territory for the last time in 2 weeks. What are your thoughts on the significance of this, and of course NATO's response to them?
I think it's a serious escalation of the Ukraine crisis. Fighting in Ukraine has been going on for over 3 years now, and has devastated the country without a decisive blow being rained on either of the two combatants or belligerents. Now, last month, Belarus hosted two exercises in which many other countries took part. These military exercises were held close to the border with that Belarus has with a number of NATO countries, including Poland and the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And I think the transgressions, Russia has never tried to explain them, could have been intended or unintended. Either way, they have raised the hackles in NATO, and the European NATO countries have scurried to respond. This is their worst fears being realized. Russia has often threatened to involve NATO countries who are supporting Ukraine, direct conflict, etc. On the other hand, NATO countries have expanded their role in Ukraine. Particularly the European NATO countries are now buying American weapons to supply to Ukraine. And this happens when the peace talks hoped for as an aftermath of Alaska summit last month have not been realized. So it's a really a dangerous development. It's symbolic, but at the same time, it shows how tripwires close on the two sides are.
Yes, Ambassador Sachdev, thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you on the programme. We stay in New York for our next story, where Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara has renewed his call for Washington to formally lift US sanctions imposed under the 2019 Caesar Act. Speaking at a summit on the sidelines of the UNGA, Shara has said that the sanctions imposed on the previous Syrian leadership are no longer justified and are increasingly seen by Syrians as measures targeting them directly. Let's take a listen in to al-Shara's statements.
We try to break the restrictions. We have to lift the restrictions and lift the sanctions put on Syria, because these sanctions were put because of the regime of Hafez al-Assad since 1979, even before we were born, because that was a country that fostered terrorism and such. These sanctions, specifically the Caesar law that was pushed by the American Congress on the former regime because it had tortured and violated human rights on its people. It had committed many violations against the Syrian people. But this is a former regime. This is past. So therefore, these sanctions have to be lifted. And if these sanctions remain with the old regime collapse, then they'll be targeting the people and not the regime, the former regime. I think Syria deserves a new opportunity at life, and Mr. President Donald Trump took a bold decision to lift the sanctions speedily, but it is still pending at the Congress, and the Congress also has to push to better the situation in Syria, because the Syrian people have suffered over the last decades, and the sanctions should not remain because it causes a burden on the people who've already suffered by the oppression of the former regime.
Shara has also said that Syria has reached advanced stages in the ongoing security talks with Israel. Let's hear it.
This course is ongoing regarding peace number 74. I believe that we reached advanced stages, and I hope that will lead us to an agreement that will keep the sovereignty of Syria and also resolve some of the security fears for Israel.
This comes as Washington has been pressuring Syria to reach a security deal with Israel during the New York meetings this week. Damascus hopes to secure a halt to Israeli airstrikes and the withdrawal of Israeli troops who have pushed into southern Syria. Shara has also met with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio on the sidelines of the UNGA. Shara's visit to New York marks the first time in 6 decades that a Syrian leader has attended the United Nations General Assembly. Okay, we're now joined by Dr. Satoru Nagao. He's a fellow at the Hudson Institute and he joins us live from Tokyo in Japan. Dr. Nagao, what is the significance of temporary President al-Shara at the UNGA this year, and what is he hoping to get out of it?
Syria's influence itself is not big just now, but this is very vital timing. When the country rebuilds their government, in this case, what kind of government they will build rely on the beginning. So that's why if the current Syrian president chooses a more open country and cooperate with the international society to rebuild their country, in this case, it will be the long-term impact, because in the future, the Syria will rebuild. That time, Syria's influence will be big, but still, their foreign policy will rely on the beginning, and that's why there will be more coordinated relation with other countries. So that's why the U.S. focusing on Syria, and Western country focusing on Syria, and President Sharia focusing on this cooperation with the Western countries. That is very good news for Western countries. So this is vital timing, and we cannot ignore. That is my opinion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Nagao, for joining us here on the program. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. We now move on and over to the United States, where Jimmy Kimmel's live show will return to ABC after a 6-day suspension. The show was pulled due to comments Kimmel made about the assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk, which drew threats of a Federal Communications Commission investigation and public backlash. Disney, ABC's parent company, initially halted production to avoid further inflaming the tense situation, calling Kimmel's remarks ill-timed and insensitive. As stated by Disney in their official announcement, the suspension came after FCC Chairman Brendan Carr's threats of fines and license revocations following Kimmel's comments about Kirk's murder. Conservative figures, including Senator Ted Cruz, criticized the FCC's stance, while consumers pressured Disney with a boycott, spiking cancellations of Disney Plus subscriptions. Despite external pressures, Disney's decision to bring Kimmel back was seen as business-driven, and Kimmel may address the issues when his show resumes. We are now joined by Ross Feingold. He is a political analyst and he joins us live from Taipei, Taiwan. Ross, can this be seen as a win by the left of America, but from free speech advocates that were rooting for Jimmy Kimmel, or is this, as people are saying, just a business-driven decision by Disney?
I wouldn't describe it as a win or a loss for anyone. The wounds from the Charlie Kirk assassination, as well as the commentary, whether that's online or on a television show in the case of Jimmy Kimmel, those wounds are going to remain in American society for a long time to come. As far as a business decision by ABC, I think we need to be frank here. The success of ABC or its parent company, Disney, that doesn't depend on this one television program. Even if the program does make money, the company would survive. If they had canceled the show entirely over this, the company would survive just fine, even though there'd be criticism that it didn't uphold free speech concerns. I think the decision to allow the show back on the air is probably in response to criticism that the company was caving into attacks on free speech. And we saw even conservatives, you mentioned Senator Ted Cruz, was also critical of people who were calling for the show to be canceled or removed, because there is a legitimate free speech concern involved here. But as far as your final point about addressing it when it comes back on the air, I would expect Kimmel to apologize. Now, keep in mind, Kimmel's long been a critic of conservatives and of President Trump, so I don't think that was a significant part of his audience anyway. They didn't watch the show. They're not going to watch the show going forward. But again, I'm sure he'll start off the show with a profuse apology.
Ross, of course, Kimmel is one of a set of late-night hosts, if you will, who are very critical of President Donald Trump and conservatives as a whole. Do you see the FCC acting differently, however, towards situations like this, if they do play out in the same way again?
Certainly, the television world is on notice. The FCC chairman he's obviously an appointee of President Trump. He's very conservative. And even before he took up this position, when he was an FCC commissioner, before he became the chairman, he was very critical of, I would just call it the liberal tendencies of Hollywood and of the media world, which is a fact. Media in Hollywood do tend to trend liberal. So he's been an open critic of this. So I think network televisions, the big networks like ABC, CBS, and NBC, they're obviously on notice that government is watching. And if there are potential legal violations, if there is a basis in law and regulation for the FCC to take action, they very well might.
Yes, thank you very much, Ross. It's always an absolute pleasure to speak to you here on NewsX World. But unfortunately, that is all that we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you very much for joining us.